Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. The liver was still warm. James Whitmore crouched beside the thing that used to be a white-tailed buck, his latex gloves slick with blood that shouldn't exist. The deer had been dead for at least 72 hours according to the decomposition markers. Bloating, skin slippage, the telltale green discoloration spreading from the abdomen. But the organ in his hand, extracted from the surgically precise cavity in the animal's chest, radiated body heat like it had been harvested seconds ago. He'd found 6 deer in the past 2 weeks, all of them missing their livers, all of them exhibiting the same impossible contradiction. Whitmore set the organ carefully into an evidence bag, his mind already cycling through explanations. Parasitic infection maintaining cellular activity post-mortem? Some unknown bacterial process generating heat through decomposition? He was a wildlife biologist with 12 years analyzing ecosystems in the Superior National Forest, and he'd never encountered anything that violated basic thermodynamics quite this thoroughly. The Boundary Waters Canoe Area wilderness stretched around him in every direction. 160,000 acres of pristine lakes and boreal forest straddling the Canadian border. It was October 2011, and the birch trees had turned the hillsides into rivers of gold. Beautiful country. Logical country. A place where cause and effect still meant something. Until 2 weeks ago, when Nathan Drake stopped answering his radio. Drake was a seasonal ranger, 26 years old, working the remote northwest sector. Enthusiastic kid, maybe a little too eager to prove himself, but solid. His last check-in had been October 9th at 1847 hours, reporting nothing unusual from his patrol around Knife Lake. When he missed his next scheduled contact 12 hours later, Whitmore had assumed equipment failure. When Drake missed the following 4 check-ins, Whitmore had hiked the 8 miles to Knife Lake himself. He'd found Drake's ranger station intact. Coffee mug still on the desk, half full and growing mold. Map spread across the table with pencil marks indicating planned patrol routes. Sleeping bag unzipped on the cot. Motorola XPR 7000 radio sitting on the charger, fully functional. No Drake. The canoe was gone. So was Drake's pack, his Garmin GPS Map 64 and his Benchmade knife. A deliberate departure then. But why leave the radio? Whitmore had filed the missing person report immediately, and search and rescue had combed the area for 3 days. They'd found nothing. No tracks, no disturbed campsites, no emergency signals. It was as if Drake had simply paddled out onto Knife Lake and evaporated. Then the deer started appearing. First one found by a group of kayakers near Thunder Point. Then another, discovered by Whitmore himself during a follow-up search. Then 4 more in quick succession, all within a 3-mile radius of Drake's last known position. Each one missing its liver, each one displaying that inexplicable warmth. The search and rescue coordinator, a gruff ex-Marine named Morrison, had dismissed Whitmore's findings. Wildlife attacks aren't our jurisdiction. Focus on finding Drake. But Whitmore couldn't shake the connection. The deer had started appearing exactly when Drake disappeared. The pattern was too precise to be coincidental. He stood now, knees cracking, and surveyed the surrounding forest. The October sun filtered through the canopy in dusty shafts, illuminating a carpet of fallen leaves. Everything appeared normal, peaceful even, but Whitmore had learned to distrust appearances. He pulled out his field notebook and added today's coordinates: 48, 1240 degree N, 91.28 W, the 7th deer. The kill sites formed a rough circle approximately 2 miles in diameter, centered on a location he'd marked as Site 0, a small island in Knife Lake where he'd found something 3 days ago that still made his hands shake when he thought about it. Scratches on a white pine. Deep gouges in the bark, 8 feet off the ground. He'd measured them carefully, each groove precisely 2.3 inches wide, spaced exactly 4.7 inches apart. The depth was consistent, half an inch into the hardwood, Whatever made those marks had carved through the tree with mechanical precision. And they formed letters, Ojibwe syllabics, according to the reference materials he'd frantically researched, an indigenous writing system used by the Ojibwe people who'd inhabited this region for thousands of years before European contact. Whitmore had photographed the symbols and emailed them to Dr. Sarah Baerstep, an anthropology professor at the University of Minnesota who specialized in Ojibwe culture. Her response had arrived yesterday. These symbols spell Baycock. It's a term from our traditional stories, a type of spirit. Where did you find these? Please call me urgently. He hadn't called. Whitmore dealt in data, not mythology. But he'd looked up the term anyway, and what he'd found had been disturbing enough that he'd printed the pages and tucked them into his field notebook. Baycock, flying skeleton, night hunter, devourer of livers, folklore, superstition, the kind of stories people told to explain natural phenomena they didn't understand. Whitmore was a scientist. He didn't believe in spirits, but he believed in evidence, and the evidence was becoming increasingly difficult to rationalize. He sealed the organ bag and packed it into his field kit alongside the others. 7 livers, 7 deer, all exhibiting the same thermal anomaly. He'd need to get them to a proper lab, run spectroscopy analysis, check for unknown chemical compounds. There had to be a rational explanation. His satellite phone buzzed. Signal was spotty this deep in the wilderness, but Morrison had insisted everyone on the search carry them. Whitmore. It's Chen, one of the SAR volunteers, a park ranger from the Southern District. We found something at Split Rock Point. You need to see this. What kind of something? A pause. Drake's canoe. You just need to see it. Whitmore checked his GPS. Split Rock Point was 4 miles northeast, accessible by a hiking trail that skirted the edge of Knife Lake. He could make it before dark if he moved fast. I'm on my way. He shouldered his pack and started walking, his boots crunching through the leaf litter. The forest seemed quieter than usual. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter. Just the whisper of wind through the birch branches and his own measured breathing. The thermal anomaly bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Heat was energy, and energy required a source. Decomposing tissue didn't generate warmth, it dissipated it. The laws of thermodynamics were absolute. Whatever was happening to these animals violated fundamental physics, unless he was measuring wrong, unless his equipment was faulty, unless he was making some obvious mistake that would seem laughable once someone pointed it out. He wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe there was a simple explanation he was overlooking. But Whitmore had built his career on meticulous observation and rigorous methodology. He didn't make careless errors, and his equipment was calibrated and tested, which left only impossible conclusions. The trail narrowed as it climbed toward Split Rock Point, winding between ancient white pines that towered overhead like cathedral pillars. Whitmore had hiked this route dozens of times, but today it felt different. Oppressive. The shadows seemed darker, more substantial, the kind of darkness that pressed against your eyes even when you were staring directly at it. He reached Split Rock Point at 16:43 hours. The location was a granite outcropping that jutted into Knife Lake, offering a panoramic view of the water. 3 SAR volunteers clustered near the shoreline, their fluorescent vests garish against the muted autumn colors. Chen waved him over. She was young, mid-20s, with her black hair pulled back in a practical braid. Down here. The canoe rested upside down on the rocks, its green hull scratched but intact. Standard 17-foot Kevlar model, identical to the one assigned to Drake. Whitmore circled it slowly, noting details. No obvious damage, no blood. Registration numbers matched Drake's assigned vessel. Look underneath, Chen said. Whitmore crouched and peered into the shadowed space beneath the overturned hull. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then Chen clicked on her flashlight and the beam illuminated the canoe's interior. Symbols, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Scratched into the Kevlar from the inside, covering every available surface. The same Ojibwe syllabics he'd found on the tree, repeated in obsessive patterns that overlapped and intersected like a deranged meditation. Jesus, Whitmore whispered. It gets worse, Chen said. She directed her flashlight toward one particular section. Read that. The symbols were larger there, more deliberately spaced. Whitmore pulled out his phone and compared them to the photographs he'd taken at Site Zero. Baycock. Over and over. Baycock, 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 Baycock. Who could have done this? One of the other volunteers asked. I mean, Drake wouldn't have carved up his own canoe, right? Whitmore ran his gloved fingers over the scratches. They were deep, gouged with significant force, but the edges were smooth, almost polished, not the ragged tears you'd expect from a knife or tool. These aren't carved, he said slowly. They're worn, like something rubbed against the Kevlar repeatedly until it abraded through the coating. What kind of something? I don't know. But that wasn't entirely true. He did know, or at least part of him had started to accept what the evidence was suggesting, even as his rational mind recoiled from the conclusion. Bone. The scratches looked like they'd been made by bone. Bag the canoe, Whitmore said, standing. I want it transported to the main station for analysis, and I want photographs of every symbol before we move it. You think this is connected to Drake's disappearance? Chen asked. I think Drake was terrified of something. Terrified enough to spend what must have been hours scratching these symbols into his only means of transportation. Protection symbols? Another volunteer suggested. Like warding off evil? Whitmore wanted to dismiss the idea as ridiculous, but he couldn't, because the evidence, all of it, from the warm livers to the precise gouges to the obsessive repetition of a single word, pointed toward something that existed outside his framework of understanding. The sun was setting, painting the lake in shades of amber and crimson, beautiful and terrible. Whitmore pulled out his satellite phone and dialed Dr. Bearstep's number. It rang 6 times before she answered. Dr. Bearstep, this is James Whitmore from Superior National Forest. You emailed me about the Ojibwe symbols I found. Yes. Her voice was cautious. Have you found more? Hundreds. All saying the same thing. Baycock. I need you to tell me what that means. A long silence. Then, it's not safe to discuss over the phone. Where are you? Boundary Waters. Knife Lake area. That's traditional Ojibwe territory. Mr. Whitmore, if you found those symbols, you need to leave that area immediately. I can't. I have a missing ranger. I need to understand what I'm dealing with. Another pause. Baycock it's not just a story. Our people have documented encounters for centuries. It's a type of spirit, what you might call a ghost or revenant. A warrior who died violently and couldn't move on. It hunts at night, flying through the trees. The legends say it kills with invisible arrows and devours the liver of its victims. The 7 warm organs in Whitmore's pack suddenly felt very heavy. That's impossible, he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. I'm not asking you to believe in spirits, Mr. Whitmore. I'm asking you to respect the patterns. Every few decades there's a spike in disappearances around Knife Lake. Always in October, always preceded by animal deaths. The elders in my community have records going back over 200 years. The pattern is consistent. What happened to the people who disappeared? Most were never found. A few were discovered weeks later, missing their livers. The cases were usually attributed to animal attacks or misadventure. But my grandmother told me stories her grandmother told her. The Baycock is real, and if it's hunting again, you need to get out. Whitmore looked at the overturned canoe, at the frantic symbols scratched by a terrified man who'd known something was coming for him. Drake had tried to protect himself, had tried to ward off whatever stalked these woods. It hadn't worked. How do you stop it? Whitmore asked. You don't. Baycock can't be killed, it's already dead. The old stories say silver can slow it down, and certain protective symbols can buy you time. But the only real safety is leaving its territory. I can't leave. Drake is still out here somewhere. Then you're making the same mistake he did. Dr. Bearstep's voice softened. I'm sorry. I wish I could tell you something different. But if the Baycock has marked you, running is your only option. How do I know if it's marked me? You'll hear it. Bone on bone, like knuckles cracking but louder. That's the sound of its approach. The call ended, leaving Whitmore staring at his phone's blank screen. Around him, the SAR volunteers were photographing the canoe, their flashlights creating dancing shadows on the rock face. The temperature was dropping rapidly, the way it did in October once the sun dipped below the horizon. Soon, it would be dark, and something in Whitmore's lizard brain, the primitive part that existed before rationality and science, was screaming at him to be somewhere else before night fell. "Pack it up," he called to the team. "We're heading back to base camp." "What about continuing the search?" Chen asked. "Not at night, we regroup in the morning." "But Drake has been missing for 2 weeks. One more night won't matter." It was a cold calculation, the kind of logical triage Whitmore excelled at. But as they hiked back through the darkening forest, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was abandoning something important, or that something was watching them retreat. The sound started as they reached the halfway point. Soft at first, a distant clicking that Whitmore initially attributed to a woodpecker or a branch rubbing against another branch in the wind. But the rhythm was wrong, too regular, too deliberate. Click, 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 click. Like knuckles cracking, the SAR team froze as one, their flashlight beams converging on the forest canopy. The clicking continued, circling them at a distance of maybe 50 yards, never getting closer, never fading away. Just that steady, horrible rhythm. "What is that?" Chen whispered. Whitmore's mouth was too dry to answer. His heart hammered against his ribs, and he felt that primal terror Dr. Bearstep had tried to warn him about. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to break formation and sprint blindly through the trees. But running would be suicide. They were miles from base camp, and the forest was dense enough that a single misstep could mean a broken ankle or worse. "Stay together," he managed. "Keep moving. Don't leave the trail." They walked in a tight cluster, their flashlights sweeping the darkness. The clicking followed, maintaining that precise 50-yard distance. Whitmore tried to catch a glimpse of whatever was making the sound, but his light never quite reached far enough. He saw shadows, or thought he did. Tall, impossibly thin shapes that flickered between the trees. The hike took 90 minutes. It felt like days. Base camp appeared like a miracle. 4 tents arranged around a central fire pit, 2 other SR volunteers waiting with hot coffee and worried expressions. The moment Whitmore's team stumbled into the circle of firelight, the clicking stopped. He collapsed onto a folding chair, his legs trembling with adrenaline dump. The other volunteers clustered around, asking questions, but Whitmore couldn't process the words. He was too busy scanning the tree line looking for movement in the darkness beyond the fire's reach. Nothing, just shadows and silence. Chen poured him coffee. "Did you see it?" "No." "But you heard it?" "Yes. What do you think it was?" Whitmore wanted to say animal or natural phenomenon or any of the dozen rational explanations he'd spent his career constructing. But the lie wouldn't come. He'd heard the clicking. He'd felt the presence. And some fundamental part of him had recognized it for what it was. "I think Drake found something in these woods," Whitmore said quietly. "Something that shouldn't exist. And I think it killed him." "You mean like a bear? A wolf?" "No. Something else." Chen sat down across from him, her face illuminated by the firelight. "You're talking about the symbols, the protection markings. You think Drake believed in, what, ghosts? I think Drake encountered something that made a believer out of him. And what about you? Do you believe?" Whitmore looked at his coffee, at his reflection wavering on the dark surface. He'd spent his entire career building a worldview based on observation, hypothesis, and testing. The scientific method had never failed him. It was the lens through which he understood reality. But what happened when reality itself became unscientific? "I believe in evidence," he said finally. "And the evidence says something is hunting in these woods, something that kills deer and removes their livers with surgical precision. Something that followed us through the forest, making sounds no known animal produces. Whether that's a spirit or some undiscovered species doesn't change the fact that it's dangerous. So what do? We find Drake, or what's left of him. And then we get the hell out of the Boundary Waters before whatever took him decides to take us too. The night passed slowly. Whitmore tried to sleep but managed only fitful dozing, startling awake at every sound. The clicking never returned, but he heard other noises, rustling in the underbrush, the snap of branches, and once, something that might have been breathing right outside his tent. Dawn arrived gray and cold, with mist rising from the lake in ghostly sheets. Whitmore crawled out of his tent to find half the SAR team already packed and ready to leave. Morrison called, Chen explained. He's pulling most of the volunteers. Says we've done everything we can and it's time to let the professionals handle it. Professionals? State police, FBI maybe. Drake's officially a missing person case now, not a search and rescue operation. Which meant they'd given up hope of finding him alive. Whitmore nodded slowly. It was the logical call, the smart call. Drake had been missing for 14 days. The statistical likelihood of survival after 2 weeks in wilderness was essentially zero. But Whitmore couldn't leave. Not yet. Not while the mystery remained unsolved. I'm staying, he said. Another day. I want to check Site Zero one more time. Alone? If necessary. Chen hesitated, then nodded. I'll come with you. But just us, and we're back by sunset. Deal? Deal. They set out at 800 hours, paddling across Knife Lake in a borrowed canoe. The water was black and still, reflecting the overcast sky like dark glass. Whitmore's arms burned from the unfamiliar exercise. He was used to hiking, not paddling. But the physical exertion helped quiet his anxious thoughts. Site Zero occupied a small island roughly a quarter-mile from the western shore. White pines covered most of the land, their roots forming a tangled maze near the waterline. Whitmore and Chen beached their canoe and climbed the slippery rocks, using exposed roots as handholds. The symbols were exactly where Whitmore had left them, carved into the largest pine. But something had changed. New marks surrounded the original scratches, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, covering the lower trunk in a chaotic pattern that made his eyes hurt to follow. These weren't here before, Whitmore said, photographing the additions. Chen touched one of the fresh gouges. They're recent. Look, sap is still leaking. She was right. Clear resin oozed from the wounds, glistening in the weak sunlight, which meant whatever made these marks had been here within the last few hours, maybe within the last few minutes. Whitmore's neck prickled. He turned slowly, scanning the island. 20 yards in diameter, mostly covered by the clustered pines. Limited visibility. Dozens of places something could hide. We should go, Chen said. Wait. Whitmore had noticed something else. A disturbance in the leaf litter near the base of the marked tree. He knelt and brushed aside the debris, revealing packed earth and something pale underneath. A bone. Human femur, judging by the size and shape. He continued digging, carefully removing the surrounding soil, and found more bones. An entire skeleton, arranged in a rough circle around the tree's roots. Oh God, Chen whispered. But it wasn't Drake. The bones were old, stained dark with age, the skull partially crushed. Whitmore estimated they'd been buried here for years, maybe decades, and carved into the skull's forehead, crude but unmistakable, was a single symbol, Baycock. This is a grave, Whitmore said, or maybe a binding site, something to keep the spirit contained. And the tree markings? I think something's trying to get out. As if in response, the clicking started. Louder this time. Much louder, and closer, so close Whitmore could feel the vibrations in his chest. Click, 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 click. The rhythm was hypnotic, almost mechanical in its precision. Chen grabbed his arm. Look. She pointed up toward the pine canopy. Something crouched among the branches. Thin and impossibly tall with limbs bent at wrong angles. Its bones, and they were definitely bones, Whitmore could see them clearly now, gleamed white against the dark needles. The skull swiveled toward them with a grinding sound, and Whitmore found himself staring into empty eye sockets that somehow still conveyed malice. The baycock opened its mouth, and the clicking intensified. Not coming from knuckles or joints, coming from its jaws, from teeth chattering in that death's head grin. Then it moved. Whitmore had never seen anything organic move that fast. One moment the creature was 30 feet above them, the next it was airborne, gliding down with impossible grace. No wings, no visible means of propulsion, just smooth, horrible flight. "Run!" Chen screamed. They ran. Whitmore crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping his face, roots trying to trip him. Behind them, the clicking grew louder, interspersed with a sound like wind through a hollow reed. The baycock's breathing, or whatever passed for breathing, in something that was already dead. They reached the canoe and shoved off, paddles biting into the water with frantic strokes. The island receded, and for a moment Whitmore thought they'd escaped. Then he saw it standing at the shoreline. The baycock was 7 feet tall, maybe 8, its skeleton held together by withered sinew and scraps of desiccated flesh. In one bony hand it held something that looked like a bow, made of pale wood or bone, Whitmore couldn't tell, strung with what might have been human hair. It raised the bow. "Down!" Whitmore shouted, throwing himself flat in the canoe. He didn't see the arrow, didn't hear it fly, but he felt the impact as something punched through the canoe's hull 6 inches from his head, and then the icy burn as lake water began flooding into the vessel. "We're taking on water!" Chen was already bailing with her hands, but it was useless. They were too far from shore, and the canoe was sinking fast. Whitmore made a split-second decision. Swim. Make for the eastern shore. Stay underwater as long as you can. They went over the side together, the shock of cold water driving the air from Whitmore's lungs. He kicked hard, propelling himself down and forward, his eyes squeezed shut against the murky depths. His pack dragged at him, heavy with equipment and those 7 preserved organs, but he couldn't let it go. The evidence was too important. His lungs began to burn. He surfaced, gasping, and caught a glimpse of Chen 20 yards ahead. The island was 100 yards behind them now, and the baycock had vanished. They swam until Whitmore's muscles screamed and his waterlogged clothes threatened to pull him under. The eastern shore materialized through the mist, granite rocks and scraggly pines, blessed solid ground. They dragged themselves onto the rocks and lay gasping like beached fish. "What the fuck was that?" Chen managed between breaths. "Exactly what Dr. Bearstep said it was." "That's impossible." "I know. Skeletons don't fly. Dead things don't hunt." "I know." "So how?" "I don't know." The words came out harsher than Whitmore intended. He sat up, water streaming from his clothes, and tried to organize his thoughts. Everything he'd observed defied explanation. Flying corpses, invisible arrows, thermal anomalies, symbols that might or might not provide protection. None of it made sense. But it was happening anyway. His satellite phone was dead, drowned in the lake. His GPS had suffered the same fate. They were miles from base camp with no way to call for help, and something that shouldn't exist was hunting them. "We need to move," Whitmore said. "Put distance between us and that island, get back to base camp and warn the others." "Warn them about what? That a ghost is killing people? They'll think we've lost our minds." "Then we show them the evidence. The canoe symbols, the photographs, the..." He stopped. His pack. Where was his pack? Gone. Lost somewhere in the lake, along with the 7 organs and all his documentation. "Fuck," Whitmore said quietly. They had nothing. No evidence, no equipment, no credibility. Just a story that would sound insane to anyone who hadn't witnessed it firsthand. Chen pulled out her own phone, waterproof case, thankfully, and checked the GPS function. "We're about 6 miles from base camp, 3 hours of hiking if we move fast." "Then let's move." The hike was brutal. They were both soaked, and the temperature was barely above freezing. Whitmore's teeth chattered and he could feel hypothermia's early stages setting in. The confusion, the drowsiness. They needed to get warm and dry soon, or the baycock would be the least of their problems. But the forest seemed to be working against them. Trails that should have been clear were blocked by fallen trees. Landmarks Whitmore had memorized appeared in the wrong locations. His internal compass, usually reliable, kept leading them in circles. "Something's wrong," Chen said after the third time they encountered the same distinctive boulder. "We should have reached the western ridge by now." Whitmore consulted her phone. The GPS was malfunctioning, showing their position jumping erratically across the map. "It's interfering with the signal, scrambling our navigation." You mean the baycock?" "Yes." "Can it do that?" Apparently, the sun was setting again. Had the whole day really passed? And with the darkness came that clicking sound. Distant at first, then closer. Always maintaining that precise 50-yard distance, circling them like a predator toying with wounded prey. They stumbled into a small clearing and stopped, too exhausted to continue. Whitmore's legs were shaking, and Chen looked barely conscious. They needed rest, needed warmth, needed to make a stand. "Build a fire," Whitmore said. "We're not going to outrun it. Fire won't stop a spirit." "Maybe not, but it's better than freezing to death in the dark." They gathered deadwood and used Chen's waterproof matches to coax a small flame to life. The heat was immediate and wonderful, driving back the cold and the shadows. Whitmore huddled close to the fire, trying to stop shivering. "I found something in Drake's station," Chen said suddenly. "I didn't mention it before because I thought it was crazy." "Tell me." She pulled out a folded piece of paper from her jacket's inner pocket, somehow still dry. This was taped under his desk. "I think it's a journal entry." Whitmore took the paper and unfolded it. Drake's handwriting, shaky and erratic. "October 12th. Third night of the clicking. I know what it is now. Old Tom at the ranger station told me the stories before he retired. Said the elders wouldn't come near Knife Lake during October. Said there was something in the woods that hunted when the leaves turned. I laughed at him. I was stupid. I've seen it. Bones and dried flesh gliding through the trees. It watches me from the shadows. I tried to leave, but I can't find my way out. The trails loop back on themselves. GPS is useless. Radio won't reach anyone. I'm writing this in case someone finds it, in case I don't make it. The symbols help. I've been carving them everywhere, anything to slow it down, but I can feel it getting closer. It's patient. It's going to wait until I'm too weak to fight back. If you're reading this, you're probably next. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to draw it here, but maybe you can do what I couldn't. The old stories say silver can hurt it. And there's a grave on the island. The original host body. Maybe if you destroy the bones, you can stop it. Or maybe you'll just die like me. Good luck. Nathan Drake. Whitmore read the note twice, his hands trembling. The grave, the skeleton we found, that's what's anchoring it to this place. You think destroying the bones would work? I think it's our only option. It's getting dark. We'd have to go back to the island at night. I know. That's suicide. Probably. Chen laughed, a brittle, slightly hysterical sound. You scientists are supposed to be the rational ones. This is insane. Yes. But you're going to do it anyway. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Then, okay, I'm coming with you. You don't have to. Shut up, Whitmore. If we're going to die doing something incredibly stupid, we're dying together. They rested for an hour, gathering their strength. The clicking never stopped, circling their camp in that maddening rhythm. Whitmore tried to plan. They'd need to get back to the island, locate the skeleton, destroy the bones somehow. But with what tools? They had nothing except Chen's knife and a box of matches. Fire, then. Burn the remains. Hope that would be enough. They set out at 2100 hours, using the firelight as a beacon to maintain their bearings. The clicking intensified as they moved, and Whitmore caught glimpses of the baycock keeping pace through the trees. It knew where they were going, knew what they planned, and it didn't seem concerned. The lake appeared through the darkness, its surface rippling with wind. No canoe this time. They'd have to swim. The water would be even colder at night, cold enough to induce cardiac arrest in minutes. But there was no alternative. "On 3, Whitmore said. They plunged into the lake together, and the cold hit like a physical blow. Whitmore's heart stuttered, his muscles locking up, but he forced himself to keep swimming. The island was only a few hundred yards away. They could make it. Had to make it. His arms felt like lead. His legs had stopped responding properly. The shore seemed to be getting farther away instead of closer, and a distant part of his mind recognized the symptoms of severe hypothermia. Then Chen grabbed his collar and pulled, dragging him through the water with the last of her strength. His feet touched rock and they crawled onto the island's shore, barely conscious. The clicking was everywhere now, above them, around them, reverberating through the trees. The baycock was here, watching from the shadows. Whitmore dragged himself to the marked pine. The skeleton was where they'd left it, bones gleaming pale in the moonlight. He pulled out Chen's matches with numb fingers. The box was soaked. The matches wouldn't light. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." Chen grabbed a piece of deadwood and tried to create friction, Boy Scout style. It was futile. Their hands were too cold, too unsteady. The clicking stopped. Whitmore looked up and saw the baycock standing 10 feet away, fully visible for the first time. Its skeleton was massive, easily 8 feet tall, with disproportionately long arms and fingers that ended in yellowed talons. Scraps of flesh clung to the bones like decayed leather, and its rib cage held something dark and writhing. Smoke or shadow, impossible to tell. It raised its bone bow, drawing back an arrow Whitmore couldn't see. He threw himself over the skeleton, covering it with his body. "Destroy the bones," he shouted at Chen. "Use the knife, break them." Chen grabbed the skull and slammed it against a rock. Once, twice, 3 times. The bone cracked but didn't shatter. The baycock released its arrow. Pain exploded in Whitmore's back, below his left shoulder blade. He'd been shot before, a hunting accident when he was 19, so he knew what a projectile wound felt like. This was worse. The arrow burned like frozen fire, and he felt something spreading through his body from the impact site. Numbness, weakness, as if the arrow was draining him. Chen was screaming, hammering the skull against the rock. The bone finally gave way, splitting into fragments. The baycock shrieked, a sound like wind through a hollow, terrible and inhuman. Its form began to waver, becoming translucent. The writhing darkness in its chest cavity boiled out, spreading like ink through water. More arrows came, invisible projectiles that punched through Chen's leg and arm. She collapsed beside Whitmore, both of them bleeding onto the ancient grave. But the baycock was fading. The skull's destruction had severed whatever force bound it to the physical world. Its form flickered and dissipated, and the darkness that had powered it sank back into the earth. The clicking stopped. Silence. Pure, blessed silence. Whitmore lay on his back, staring at the stars wheeling overhead. His body felt distant, disconnected. The arrow wound was going cold, spreading numbness through his torso. He couldn't feel his legs anymore. "Chen?" he managed. "Still here." Her voice was weak. "We did it?" "I think so." "Good. That's good." Consciousness came and went in waves. At some point he heard voices, real voices, human voices. Flashlights swept across the island, and hands lifted him carefully. Someone was calling for a medevac. He woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Duluth. The doctors said he'd been incredibly lucky. The mysterious puncture wound in his back had missed all his vital organs by centimeters. Chen was in the next room, recovering from similar injuries. They'd been found on the island by a SAR team that had launched when they failed to return to base camp. Morrison visited on the 4th day, looking haggard. "We found Drake," he said quietly, "or what was left of him. He was buried on the island, near where we found you, missing his liver, like the deer." Whitmore nodded slowly. "The baycock took him." "The what?" "Nothing. How's Chen?" "She'll live. You both will. You're very lucky." We destroyed the bones, the original host. That's what was anchoring it. Morrison frowned. Whitmore, I don't know what you and Chen experienced out there. Hypothermia causes hallucinations, and you were both severely hypothermic when we found you. But there are no such things as, I know what I saw. The psychological trauma from Drake's death is irrelevant. Whitmore cut him off. Check the bones from that grave. Run carbon dating. I guarantee they're at least 200 years old, and I guarantee the cause of death was violent. That skeleton was a warrior, and something kept it from resting. Morrison left without agreeing to run the tests. But Whitmore saw the doubt in his eyes, the uncertainty. He'd read the reports, seen the photographs of the canoe symbols, heard the clicking sounds on the recorded radio chatter from that night. He knew something was wrong, even if he couldn't accept what. Dr. Bearstep came to visit on Whitmore's 6th day in the hospital. She sat beside his bed, her weathered face grave. My grandmother would have said you did a sacred thing, she told him, putting that warrior's spirit to rest. It's been hunting for a very long time. How long? The stories go back to the 1700s, maybe longer. There was a battle between Ojibwe warriors and Dakota raiders on that island. Many died. One of the dead, they say he was betrayed by his own people, killed by friendly fire, refused to accept his death. He became Baycock, trapped between worlds, angry and hungry. Why did he kill Drake? Proximity. Bad luck. October is when the barrier between worlds is thinnest. The Baycock hunts when it can, takes what it needs to maintain its existence. Livers contain life force, spiritual energy. It fed on animals mostly, but sometimes it took humans. Yes. Whitmore was silent, processing. I destroyed the skeleton. Will it come back? No. You broke the anchor. The spirit is free now. Whether that means final death or moving on to whatever comes next, I can't say. But it won't hunt these woods anymore. She stood to leave, then paused. Will you tell people what happened? Would they believe me? No, probably not. Then what's the point? She smiled sadly. The point is that you know. You've seen beyond the veil, Mr. Whitmore. You've witnessed something most people never will. That knowledge changes you, makes it impossible to see the world the same way again. She was right. Whitmore was discharged 2 weeks later with a clean bill of health, physically at least. Mentally, he was different, changed. The scientific frameworks that had defined his worldview his entire life felt inadequate now, too narrow to encompass what he'd experienced. He returned to work at Superior National Forest but requested a transfer away from the Boundary Waters. His superiors granted it without question. Everyone agreed he needed distance from the trauma of losing Drake. But sometimes on October nights when the wind blew through the trees, Whitmore would hear clicking sounds in the distance. Probably just branches. Probably just his imagination. Probably. He never went back to Knife Lake, never tried to verify what happened. The Baycock was gone, Drake was found, and Whitmore had survived. That was enough. It had to be enough. Because the alternative, accepting that the world contained horrors beyond comprehension, that science couldn't explain everything, that death wasn't always final, was too much to bear. So he filed his reports, kept his theories to himself, and tried to forget the feeling of invisible arrows piercing his flesh, tried to forget the sight of bone gliding through darkness, tried to forget the clicking. But on quiet nights when sleep wouldn't come, James Whitmore found himself thinking about Dr. Bearstep's words, about veils and barriers and the spaces between worlds, about what else might be waiting in the shadows, patient and hungry, and he wondered if surviving the Baycock had been mercy or curse. The dreams suggested the latter. Every night he returned to that island, to the gravesite, to the moment the skull shattered. And every night the Baycock turned toward him with those empty eye sockets and opened its mouth to click out a message he almost understood. Almost, but not quite. And perhaps that was the most terrifying part of all, not the horror he'd faced, but the certainty that there were deeper horrors still waiting. Things his rational mind couldn't process. things that existed in the margins between belief and evidence, things that hunted. Chen transferred to a different district without saying goodbye. Morrison retired early. The Boundary Waters remained beautiful and deadly, and tourists continued to hike its trails, unaware of what watched from the shadows. Life went on, and James Whitmore, man of science and reason, carried the weight of impossible knowledge wherever he went, a weight measured not in facts or data, but in the sound of bones clicking in the darkness, forever clicking, forever waiting, forever hungry. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Thomas O'Brien had saved 47 lives in 18 years as a ranger. He kept count not out of pride but out of precision, the same methodical attention to detail that made him good at his job. 47 people who would have died from exposure, falls, animal attacks, or simple bad decisions in the wilderness, all alive because he knew what he was doing. At 52 years old, with a weathered face that reflected every season spent in the backcountry, and hands scarred from 1,000 small emergencies, Thomas had earned his confidence. He'd seen hypothermia, heat stroke, broken bones protruding through skin, bear maulings, lightning strikes. He'd pulled bodies from crevasses and talked suicidal hikers down from ledges. There was nothing in Olympic National Park that could surprise him anymore. That's what he believed, standing in the Hall of Mosses at 2:47 p.m. on October 3, 2015, 30 seconds before reality proved him catastrophically wrong. The Hoh Rainforest was Thomas's territory, the temperate rainforest where Sitka spruce grew 300 feet tall and every surface dripped with moss thick enough to cushion falls. October brought rain, not the occasional shower but constant precipitation that turned the forest into a living, breathing organism of moisture and decay. The air itself felt liquid, heavy with water and the smell of rot, though not unpleasant rot. Rich rot. Fertile rot. The kind of decomposition that fed new growth in an endless cycle that had been running since the last ice age. Tyler Dawson had been missing for 36 hours. 23 years old, graduate student from UC Berkeley studying moss biodiversity, last seen on the Hoh River Trail headed toward the Hall of Mosses. His tent at the Hoh campground was still there, belongings undisturbed, but Tyler himself had vanished. Standard search protocol, hasty search of probable areas first, then expanding grid if necessary. Thomas had found Tyler's field notebook 2 hours ago, lying open on the trail at mile marker 1.3. Pages soaked through but ink still legible. The entries were normal at first. Scientific observations about Isothecium, Myoceroides growth patterns, pH measurements of tree bark, humidity readings. Then the handwriting changed, became frantic. Something followed me from the falls, can't see it but can feel it. Pressure behind my eyes like being underwater. The moss is growing wrong. Patterns that shouldn't be possible. Geometric, intentional. Found a clearing that isn't on any map. Stone markers arranged in a circle. 7 markers, each carved with symbols. Japanese symbols? Need to research. Temperature dropped 15 degrees in the clearing even though it's 70°F everywhere else. Camera won't work inside the circle. Batteries drain instantly, something is very wrong. Going back to document. If I don't return? The entry ended mid-sentence. Thomas had radioed base, reported the notebook, requested additional searchers. The response came back that a storm was moving in. Heavy rain, possible flash flooding in the river valleys. He had maybe 4 hours before conditions became too dangerous for effective search operations. 4 hours to find Tyler Dawson, dead or alive before the forest became impassable. He'd been following boot prints in the soft mud, size 10 Merrill Moabs matching Tyler's gear list when he saw it. Not Tyler. Not anything that should exist in objective reality. Thomas stopped walking, stopped breathing, stopped thinking for a moment as his brain tried to process what his eyes insisted was there. A woman stood 30 feet ahead on the trail, perfectly motionless, wearing a white kimono that should have been soaked through in the constant drizzle but somehow remained pristine. Her hair was black, long enough to reach the ground, hanging in front of her face like a curtain. She wasn't translucent or glowing or any of the Hollywood ghost cliches. She was solid, physical, real. Except she cast no shadow despite the diffuse forest light. And the moss beneath her feet wasn't compressed, wasn't disturbed, as if she weighed nothing at all. Thomas's hand moved automatically to his radio, then stopped. What would he report? That he was seeing things? He'd done wilderness psych evaluations on enough disoriented hikers to know the symptoms of exhaustion-induced hallucination. But he wasn't exhausted. He'd slept well, eaten breakfast, was properly hydrated. This wasn't hallucination, this was something else. The woman's head tilted slowly to one side, motion too smooth, too continuous, like a recording played at the wrong speed. Thomas heard a sound, wet, gurgling, the noise of someone trying to breathe through a crushed throat. The woman's hands emerged from the kimono sleeves, pale and swollen, fingernails black and too long, and she raised them slowly toward her face, pushing the hair aside. Thomas had seen corpses before. Drowning victims, their faces bloated and discolored. This was worse. The woman's face was intact but wrong, skin too tight, eyes too wide, mouth open in a silent scream that showed teeth filed to points and a tongue swollen to fill the entire oral cavity. But what made Thomas's legs go weak was the recognition. He knew this face. He'd seen it 3 days ago, in the photo attached to a missing person report from 6 months earlier. Yuki Tanaka, 28 years old, visiting from Osaka, disappeared while hiking the Ho River Trail in April. Extensive search, no body recovered, case still open, and now she was standing in front of him. 6 months dead, but somehow present, somehow animate, somehow looking at him with eyes that held nothing but rage and grief, and the kind of hatred that transcended mortality. Thomas did what 18 years of experience told him to do. He spoke calmly, professionally, the voice he used with panicking hikers. "Ma'am, I'm Ranger Thomas O'Brien with the National Park Service. Are you injured? Do you need assistance?" Yuki Tanaka's mouth opened wider. The gurgling sound intensified, resolved into words in a language Thomas didn't speak. Japanese, he assumed. But the meaning was clear in the tone. Accusation, condemnation, rage. Then she was closer. Not walking closer, just closer, as if distance had become optional, as if space itself had folded to put her 10 feet away instead of 30. Thomas stumbled backward, hand finally reaching his radio, keying the transmit button. "Base, this is O'Brien. I need immediate backup at my location. I've encountered..." The radio died. Not gradually, not with static. Just died. The LED display going dark, the device suddenly cold in his hand despite the battery being fully charged an hour ago. Yuki Tanaka reached toward him, those bloated hands extending impossibly far, fingers stretching like taffy, nails sharp enough to tear. Thomas did something he'd never done in 18 years. He ran. Not a tactical retreat, not a strategic withdrawal. Full panic flight, crashing through sword ferns and devil's club, branches whipping his face, boots slipping on moss-covered logs. He ran like prey runs from a predator, abandoning all training and professionalism and rational thought. Behind him, the gurgling laughter followed, and footsteps that made no sound but somehow felt closer with each stride. Thomas's lungs burned, legs cramping from the sudden exertion. He was 52, in good shape but not young, and the forest had never seemed so vast, so hostile, so impossible to navigate. The trail disappeared, trees closed in. The light changed, shifted to a greenish quality that made everything look underwater, drowned, dead. He burst into a clearing and stopped, chest heaving, and realized he'd found the place Tyler Dawson had described. 7 stone markers, each 4 feet tall, arranged in a perfect circle. Carved symbols covered every surface. Kanji characters Thomas couldn't read but recognized as Japanese. At the center of the circle was a cairn, and embedded in the cairn was something that made his throat close. Tyler Dawson's Nikon D750, lens cracked, display shattered, but still somehow recording. The red light was on. Thomas approached the camera slowly, every instinct screaming that he should leave, should run. should get as far from this clearing as possible, but Tyler might still be alive. 47 saves in 18 years. He couldn't stop at 47. He retrieved the camera, fingers numb from cold that shouldn't exist in October's 60-degree humidity. The display was cracked but functional. He navigated to the last video file, pressed play. The footage showed Tyler's face close to the camera, eyes wide with terror. October 2nd, 4:30 p.m. If anyone finds this, don't come to the clearing, don't look at the stones, don't read the symbols. I made a mistake. I thought they were anthropological artifacts, evidence of early Japanese immigration to the Pacific Northwest. I started translating them. That's when she came. Yuki Tanaka, the woman who disappeared in April. She's not missing. She's here. She's bound here. The stones are a prison, or a memorial, or both. The symbols tell her story. Murdered by her hiking partner, body hidden in the forest, death unacknowledged. She's an onryo, a vengeful spirit. Japanese folklore, spirits who died with such rage that they can't move on, can't rest. They haunt the place of their death until someone acknowledges what happened, until justice is served. But there's no justice here. No one knows she was murdered. Everyone thinks she just got lost. And now she's trapped between death and vengeance, getting stronger, angrier, pulling the forest itself into her rage. The temperature drops, electronics fail, reality bends. She's spreading, consuming, and I let her out. I broke the seal when I touched the stones, when I read the symbols aloud. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She's coming and I can't. The video cut to static, then cleared again. Now the camera was on the ground, angled up at the forest canopy, capturing nothing but trees and moss and dripping water. But the audio continued. Tyler's voice, no longer scared, just tired. She showed me what happened, made me experience it. Felt the knife going in, felt the hands pushing me down, felt the dirt covering my face, felt her death, hundreds of times, over and over. That's what she does, makes you feel it, makes you die the way she died. And I can't anymore. I can't keep dying, so I'm going to stop. I'm going to make it stop. The audio ended with a wet, choking sound and then silence. Thomas stood in the clearing, camera in shaking hands, and understood with perfect clarity that Tyler Dawson was dead. Suicide or murder, it didn't matter. The forest had killed him, or he'd killed himself to escape what the forest contained. Either way, 47 saves, not 48. Movement at the edge of the clearing. Yuki Tanaka emerged from between the stone markers, stepping through the symbols like passing through a doorway. She wasn't alone. Behind her, partially visible, another figure, male, older, also wearing traditional Japanese clothing, also moving with that too smooth motion that violated natural physics. And behind him, more figures. A crowd of them, dozens, all with that same dead-eyed stare, all radiating cold and rage. Thomas's mind, trained to analyze and solve problems, worked frantically. The stones were a prison or memorial. Breaking the seal had released Yuki, but not just Yuki. Others. How many Japanese immigrants had died in Olympic National Park over the decades? How many deaths had gone unacknowledged, uninvestigated, attributed to natural causes or simple misadventure? The forest was a graveyard, and Tyler Dawson had broken the lock. The temperature was dropping. Thomas could see his breath now, ice forming on the moss, impossible frost spreading across ferns. His Garmin GPS showed his coordinates as 47.8607 degree IN, 123, 9355 degree W, elevation 578 feet. But the coordinates were jumping, flickering, sometimes showing him in the Pacific Ocean, sometimes in Japan, sometimes in places that didn't exist on any map. Yuki Tanaka spoke again, that gurgling voice resolving into words Thomas could suddenly understand, as if his brain was translating without his permission. You were here when I died. You searched for me. You found nothing. You stopped looking. You let them say I was careless, that I got lost, that I died of exposure. You let my death mean nothing. You let him escape. I didn't know, Thomas said, his voice cracking. Tell me what happened. Tell me who killed you. Yuki's mouth stretched wider, impossibly wide, and she screamed. Not sound, but pressure. A physical force that knocked Thomas to his knees, split the stone markers with hairline cracks, sent the camera flying from his hands. When the pressure released, he was on the ground, ears bleeding, vision blurred. The other spirits advanced. Thomas crawled backward, hands sinking into moss that suddenly felt like flesh, yielding and warm and wrong. The forest was transforming around him, trees bending at angles that hurt to look at, moss growing in geometric patterns that suggested intelligence, intention, malice. The Hoh rainforest, ancient and indifferent, was becoming something else. A manifestation of accumulated rage, decades of death and injustice soaking into the soil and finally finding expression. Thomas's hand touched something hard, angular. Tyler's camera. He grabbed it, pulled himself upright using a stone marker for support. The symbols carved into the stone were glowing now, faint blue light that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He'd touched the stones. He'd broken the seal further. Whatever barrier had contained these spirits was disintegrating completely. "Who killed you?" Thomas shouted at Yuki. "Give me a name. Let me help." Yuki Tanaka's face was inches from his now, that bloated tongue extending to touch his cheek, cold and wet. She showed him, not words but images, memories forced directly into his mind. A hiking partner. Male, 40s, glasses, fleece jacket. Talking as they walked. Friendly at first, then less friendly, an argument about the trail, about whether to turn back. Yuki wanting to continue. The man insisting they return. Yuki refusing. The man's expression changing. Anger, decision. Knife from his pack, not a weapon, just a camping knife, but sharp enough. Surprise on Yuki's face. Pain. The realization that she was dying. The man dragging her off the trail, covering her with debris, leaving. Days later, participating in the search effort, expressing concern, lying so smoothly that even Thomas had believed him. The memory ended and Thomas was on his knees again, vomiting into the moss, experiencing the aftershock of violent death. He'd felt it, felt the knife, felt her body shutting down, felt the rage that came after, the refusal to die properly, the binding to this place through sheer force of hatred. "I remember him," Thomas said when he could speak. He was part of the search. He filed the missing person report. David Chen, her hiking partner. We interviewed him. He seemed devastated. Yuki's scream was worse this time, splitting trees, sending birds erupting from the canopy in terror. The name had power. Recognition had power. Acknowledgement had power. Thomas's radio crackled to life despite the dead battery. A voice came through, not the dispatcher but Tyler Dawson, speaking Japanese that Thomas's compromised mind somehow understood. "You can't fix this by catching one murderer. There are dozens of us here. Dozens of deaths. Some murdered, some accidental but ignored, some died calling for help that never came. We're all bound here by injustice, by being forgotten, by meaning nothing. You can't save us. You can't save yourself. You're part of it now." "Then what do you want?" Thomas shouted at the crowd of spirits advancing from every direction, the clearing shrinking as they pressed closer. Yuki Tanaka placed her cold hand on his chest, directly over his heart. He felt his core temperature plummet, felt ice forming in his blood, felt his heart struggling to pump frozen sludge through narrowing vessels. She was killing him the way she'd been killed. Slowly, deliberately, with full awareness of every moment, but she was also showing him something, a vision or a possibility or a choice. He saw himself leaving the clearing, returning to civilization, reporting what he'd learned about David Chen. He saw Chen's arrest, trial, conviction. He saw Yuki's body finally recovered, finally given proper burial, finally acknowledged, and he saw her rage, not disappearing but diminishing, becoming manageable, becoming containable. "One at a time," Thomas gasped, his lips turning blue. "I can't save you all, but I can start. I can acknowledge you. I can make your death mean something." The pressure on his chest released. The temperature rose slightly, not to normal, but to survivable. Yuki Tanaka stepped back, and the other spirits stopped advancing. They were still there, still watching with dead eyes, still radiating hatred, but they were waiting. Thomas pulled out his backup radio. Analog, no computer chips, the kind that survived electromagnetic interference. It crackled to life immediately. "Base, this is O'Brien. Code Black. I found evidence of homicide. Tyler Dawson is deceased. Yuki Tanaka's case needs to be reopened as murder investigation. Suspect is David Chen, Seattle resident. I'm transmitting coordinates for body recovery, requesting immediate police and forensic response." He gave the coordinates, described what he'd learned, carefully edited to remove any mention of ghosts or spirits or impossibility. Just evidence. Just investigation. Just justice or the bureaucratic approximation of it. The dispatcher's voice was skeptical but professional. "Copy that, O'Brien. Are you saying you found human remains?" "Affirmative. And I have video evidence implicating David Chen in Yuki Tanaka's death. I'm securing the scene now." He wasn't securing anything. He was standing in a clearing full of vengeful spirits, freezing despite the October warmth, bleeding from his ears, watching reality bend around him. But he said the right words, the procedural words, the words that would trigger the machinery of investigation and justice. When he lowered the radio, Yuki Tanaka was gone. The other spirits remained, but they'd retreated to the edges of the clearing, no longer advancing. The stone markers had stopped glowing. The temperature was rising back to normal, though the unnatural frost remained, a reminder that what he'd experienced was real. Thomas found Tyler Dawson's body an hour later, hanging from a Sitka spruce 50 feet from the clearing. The rope was climbing cord from his own pack, professional knots. Suicide by hanging, no question. But Tyler's face was frozen in an expression of terror so profound that Thomas had to look away after documenting the scene. The forensic team arrived by helicopter as the storm broke, rain turning from drizzle to deluge. Thomas led them to Yuki Tanaka's remains, shallow grave 200 yards from the trail, body wrapped in a tarp, partially decomposed but identifiable. The camera footage was recovered, analyzed, enhanced. David Chen was arrested 3 days later at his home in Seattle, charged with second-degree murder. He confessed within hours, unable to bear the weight anymore. The guilt that had been eating him for 6 months. The trial was quick. Chen got 15 years. Yuki Tanaka's body was cremated per her family's wishes. Ashes returned to Japan. The case was closed. Justice, within the limitations of the legal system, had been served. Thomas returned to work after 2 weeks of administrative leave and mandatory psychological evaluation. The department psychologist diagnosed him with acute stress reaction, prescribed medication he didn't take, and cleared him for duty with the recommendation that he transition to desk work. Thomas declined. He had 47 saves. He needed to get back to the forest, but the forest had changed, or he had changed, or his perception of the forest had changed. He saw things now, not constantly, not everywhere, but in certain places at certain times. Figures in the distance that vanished when he approached, cold spots that made no meteorological sense, electronics that failed for no reason, shadows that moved independent of light sources. He started researching, spending his off hours in the park archives reading old incident reports looking for patterns. He found them. Deaths that seemed suspicious, but were never investigated. Missing persons cases that went cold too quickly. Accidents that might not have been accidents. Over the decades, over the century since the park was established, dozens of people had died in Olympic National Park, under circumstances that deserved more scrutiny than they received. Thomas made a list, names, dates, locations. He cross-referenced with news reports, interviewed retired rangers, contacted families, and slowly, methodically, he began reopening cases. Some led nowhere. Genuinely accidental deaths, genuine disappearances. But others revealed negligence or cover-ups or crimes that had been buried by bureaucracy and indifference. He found the body of a hiker reported missing in 1998, remains hidden in a ravine, evidence of foul play clear once someone actually looked. He discovered that a bear attack in 2003 had actually been domestic violence. Husband had murdered his wife on the trail and staged the scene. He connected 3 disappearances in the 1980s to a serial killer who'd been operating along the Pacific Crest Trail. Each case he solved, each body he recovered, each crime he brought to light, the spirits grew quieter. Not gone, but less active, less angry. The cold spots became less frequent. The electronic failures decreased. The shadows stopped moving. Thomas O'Brien was 54 years old when he finally returned to the clearing with the 7 stone markers. He'd brought a Blackfeet elder from Montana, an expert in spiritual cleansing who'd agreed to help after Thomas shared the whole story, including the impossible parts. They performed a ceremony, not traditional Japanese, but the elder said grief and rage were universal, could be addressed through any sincere tradition. They burned sage, tobacco, sweet grass. They spoke prayers in Blackfeet and English. They acknowledged each death, each name on Thomas's list, each spirit that had been bound by injustice. And they asked for release, for peace, for the kind of rest that comes when finally being seen, being heard, being remembered. The stone markers cracked and fell, symbols dissolving as if erased. The temperature normalized. The frost melted. The forest returned to being just a forest, ancient, indifferent, but no longer hostile. Thomas never saw Yuki Tanaka again. Never saw any of the spirits again, though he remained vigilant, watching for signs. He kept adding to his list, kept investigating, kept refusing to let deaths go unacknowledged. It became his mission, the work that defined his final years as a ranger. He retired at 62, after 26 years in the National Park Service, with 53 saves on his official record. Unofficially, he'd acknowledged 87 deaths, brought closure to 64 families, solved 19 cold cases. The Pacific Northwest SAR community called him a legend. The department gave him awards. But Thomas knew the truth. He'd been wrong about surprise. The forest could still surprise him, still humble him, still teach him that 18 years of experience meant nothing compared to the depths of human capacity for injustice and the persistence of rage beyond death. He'd learned that confidence was just another form of blindness, that certainty was dangerous, that the universe contained possibilities his rational mind would never fully accept. On his last day of work, Thomas hiked back to the Hall of Mosses, stood in the clearing where the 7 stones had been, and felt nothing but rain and moss and the slow decay of an ancient forest. It was peaceful, ordinary, real in the way reality was supposed to be real. He placed a small memorial plaque he'd made, engraved with Yuki Tanaka's name and dates, then Tyler Dawson's, then all 87 names on his list. It wasn't official park policy. It probably violated a dozen regulations. But Thomas O'Brien, who'd saved 47 lives and acknowledged 87 deaths, didn't particularly care about regulations anymore. He left the forest as the sun set, painting the moss-covered trees in shades of gold and amber. His knees ached, his back complained, his ears still had intermittent tinnitus from that day 6 years ago when reality had bent. But he was alive, intact, whole in the ways that mattered. Behind him, in the gathering dusk, he heard a sound. A woman's voice speaking Japanese, the words unclear but the tone unmistakable. Gratitude, acknowledgement, goodbye. Thomas didn't turn around. He just raised his hand in a small wave and kept walking. Out of the forest, back to the world where the dead stayed dead and the impossible remained safely impossible. Most of the time. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The blood trail started at the tree line and disappeared into white nothing. David Ramirez crouched in the snow, his breath forming clouds that the wind tore apart before they could fully materialize. The blood was frozen solid, dark red ice crystals that caught the October sun like garnets scattered across a wedding dress. He pressed his gloved finger against one of the larger drops. It didn't yield. Frozen for hours, maybe longer. But the temperature had only dropped below freezing 2 hours ago, right around dawn. He followed the trail with his eyes, not moving yet. Standard protocol: assess before engaging. The drops led upslope toward the glacial cirque, spacing irregular but consistent enough to suggest the source was moving under its own power. Not dragged. Walking. Running, maybe. The pattern broke near a boulder cluster 30 yards up. A wide spray pattern, arterial. Someone had stopped there, bled heavily, then kept going. David's radio crackled. "Base to Ranger 7. What's your status?" He keyed the mic, still studying the blood trail. "I'm at the coordinates," Sullivan transmitted. "Found a blood trail heading northeast toward Hidden Lake Cirque. Significant volume, I'm tracking it now." "Negative, Ranger 7, wait for backup. ETA 45 minutes. David looked at his watch. 0947. Derek Sullivan had missed his check-in at 07:00. His emergency beacon had activated at 0815, transmitting GPS coordinates for exactly 90 seconds before going dead. That was almost 2 hours ago. The protocol was clear. Wait for backup. Don't engage alone. Preserve the scene for investigation. David thought about his daughter Sophia's birthday party tomorrow. She'd be 7. His son Miguel had spent the last week making decorations with construction paper and glitter that got everywhere. David's wife Carmen had taken a double shift at the hospital to afford the cake Sophia wanted. 3 tiers with a unicorn on top. They needed his paycheck. They needed him to come home. Following protocol meant he'd come home. But Derek Sullivan had 2 kids too. Younger than David's, 3 and 5. Their photos were taped to Derek's locker at the station. "Copy base, maintaining position." David released the mic and stood up. He'd follow the blood trail just far enough to determine if Sullivan was mobile and conscious. Just far enough to know if waiting 45 minutes meant finding a colleague or finding a body. That was reasonable. That was justifiable. The trail led him up through scattered white bark pine, their branches skeletal against the cloudless sky. Glacier National Park in late October was a landscape of contradictions. Brutal beauty, the kind that killed you while you admired it. The Going to the Sun road had closed for the season 2 weeks ago. They were deep into the dangerous months now, when early winter storms could trap you above the tree line, and the cold could stop your heart before you realized you were dying. David had been a ranger here for 6 years. Before that, 12 years as an EMT in Phoenix. He'd moved the family to Montana for the slower pace, the safety, the clean air. Carmen had been skeptical. "You want to raise Phoenix kids in Montana winter?" But she'd come around. Sophia and Miguel had adapted fast, the way kids do. They loved the snow, loved the hiking, loved that their dad worked in the most beautiful place in America. He tried to remember that beauty now as he followed the blood trail higher. Tried not to think about the way the temperature was dropping despite the sun. Tried not to notice that his breath was visible in sharp, crystal-clear puffs, the kind you saw at 20 below, not the 38 degrees his thermometer had read at the truck. The blood pattern changed near the boulder cluster. Not just a spray, a pool. Sullivan had stopped here for a while. David knelt, examining the snow. Boot prints, size 11, Sullivan's Danners. He'd been on his knees. Dark stains that might be vomit, frozen solid, and something else. Marks in the snow like he'd been digging, clawing at the frozen ground with his bare hands. His gloves lay discarded nearby, the fingers shredded from the inside out. David picked up one glove. The fabric was stiff with frozen blood, but the damage was wrong. Not torn by rocks or branches, the fingertips had been forced outward, burst open from internal pressure, like something had tried to grow through them. His radio crackled again. "Ranger 7, backup is delayed. Helicopter had mechanical issues. Ground team is en route, but ETA is now 90 minutes. Confirm your holding position." 90 minutes. David looked upslope. The blood trail continued, fresher now, the drops not quite frozen. Sullivan was still moving, still bleeding, still alive maybe. "Ranger 7, confirm you copy." David thought about protocol. about his family, about Derek Sullivan's kids waiting at home with their mother, who didn't know yet that Daddy had missed check-in, didn't know that something had gone wrong up here in the high country where the air was too thin and the cold was too hungry. Copy base, holding position. He switched off the radio and kept climbing. David had met Derek Sullivan 8 months ago when the younger ranger transferred from Yellowstone. 29 years old, enthusiastic, maybe too eager to prove himself in the backcountry. He'd been a wilderness guide before joining the Park Service, had all the certifications, could navigate by stars and identify tracks in conditions that looked like blank white noise to most people. He'd reminded David of himself at that age, before marriage and kids had added layers of caution to every decision. They'd worked together on a rescue in July, a family of tourists who'd ignored the warnings and gotten caught in a lightning storm above Logan Pass. Derek had kept the father calm while David treated the daughter's burns, had carried the exhausted mother down 3 miles of trail in deteriorating weather without complaint. Good ranger, solid colleague. The kind of guy you wanted watching your back in an emergency. Which made it worse that Derek had been alone up here. Budget cuts meant understaffing, which meant solo patrols in areas that should require pairs. Derek had drawn the short straw this week. Routine wildlife monitoring near Hidden Lake, supposed to be a milk run. Nothing dangerous, nothing complicated. Check the trail cameras, document elk movement patterns, back to base by 16th hour. Except Derek had activated his emergency beacon at 08:15, and now David was following a blood trail that shouldn't exist into terrain that felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. The cold was getting worse. David's core temperature regulator, the one Carmen had insisted he carry after that close call 2 winters ago, read 26 degrees. Impossible. The forecast had called for highs in the low 40s. Even accounting for wind chill and elevation, the math didn't work. His fingers were going numb despite his glove liners. His face hurt where the skin was exposed. And underneath the physical discomfort, something else. Hunger. Not normal hunger. Not the kind that reminded you to eat a protein bar and drink water. This was deeper, more urgent. A hollowness in his gut that felt like it was expanding, consuming him from the inside out. David stopped, forcing himself to breathe slowly. Hypothermia could mess with your head, make you irrational. But he wasn't hypothermic. He'd been trained to recognize the symptoms. This was something else. The blood trail led over a ridgeline and down into a narrow valley that shouldn't be there. David had hiked this area dozens of times. He knew the topography. There was no valley here, just a gradual slope leading to the Hidden Lake overlook. But the snow-covered depression in front of him was unmistakable. Steep sides, maybe 50 feet deep, a quarter-mile long. And at the bottom, something dark against the white. Derek Sullivan's orange emergency bivy sack. David scrambled down the slope, using his ice axe for purchase. The hunger was worse now, a gnawing ache that made his hands shake. He tried to focus on the task, on reaching Derek, on getting them both down to safety before the weather turned. But his mind kept wandering to strange places. Memories of meals, not recent ones, but childhood dinners at his abuela's house in Tucson, the smell of carne asada, the taste of her homemade tortillas, the way she'd pile his plate high and insist he eat more. Always more. Never enough. The bivy sack was empty, no blood inside, no signs of struggle. Derek's pack lay nearby, contents scattered in the snow. David inventoried quickly. Water bottles frozen solid. Food wrappers torn open and licked clean. First aid kit with bandages pulled out and discarded unused. The Garmin GPS was there, screen shattered, and Derek's satellite phone cracked in half like someone had bitten through it. Teeth marks. Definitely teeth marks. Human-sized, but the spacing was wrong, the canines too long. David's radio wouldn't work in the valley. Too much terrain interference. He was on his own. He should turn back now, mark the location, wait for backup with proper equipment and manpower. That was protocol. That was the smart move. But the blood trail continued across the valley floor, and this time it wasn't just drops. It was smears, handprints, the dragging marks of someone crawling, and something else. Footprints that started human and became something else. The right boot print was normal. Derek's danners leaving their distinctive tread. The left print started normal but elongated with each step, the toes spreading apart, stretching, until they weren't human anymore. David followed them to the far end of the valley where the slope became a sheer rock face. There was an opening there, a cave mouth that definitely hadn't been on any of the geological surveys. The smell that came from it made David's eyes water. Decay and copper and something chemical like ammonia mixed with burnt hair. Derek? His voice sounded too loud in the cold silence. Derek Sullivan, if you're in there, I'm coming in. It's David Ramirez. We're getting you out. No response, just the wind and underneath it, something that might have been breathing, or might have been the mountain itself, exhaling ancient cold. David pulled his flashlight from his belt. The cave entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. Inside, the temperature dropped another 20 degrees. His thermometer stopped reading at 0, the digital display flickering and dying. The cave walls were ice, but not regular ice. This was dark, almost black, with things frozen inside, shapes that might have been branches or bones. The blood trail was everywhere now, painting the walls, the ceiling, the floor. And the footprints. Jesus Christ, the footprints. They'd fully transformed. Whatever had walked into this cave on human feet was leaving impressions that belonged to something else entirely. Something huge. Something wrong. David found him 30 feet in, where the cave opened into a larger chamber. Derek Sullivan crouched in the center, naked except for shredded remnants of his thermal base layer. His skin was gray-white, covered in frost that seemed to grow from within rather than settle from without. His back was to David, vertebrae pressing against skin like piano keys, each one too prominent, too sharp. Derek? David kept his voice steady, the way he'd been trained for medical emergencies. I'm here to help. We need to get you warm and down the mountain. Can you hear me? Derek's head turned. Not his body. Just his head, rotating on his neck like an owl, 90 degrees, 120, 150, until he was looking directly at David despite facing away. His eyes were yellow. Not jaundiced yellow, not diseased yellow. Pure yellow like sulfur. Like flames. Like nothing human. David. Derek's voice was layered, his words overlapping with something else speaking underneath. Something that used his mouth, but wasn't him. You shouldn't have come. You need to leave now before it gets worse. I'm not leaving without you. Whatever's happening, we can... It's too late for me. Derek's body began to turn now, joints cracking with sounds like ice breaking. I violated the taboo. I didn't mean to, I didn't know. But intent doesn't matter. The hunger doesn't care about intent. David took a step back. His hand moved to the radio on his belt, remembered it wouldn't work. Derek, you're not making sense. You're hypothermic, confused. Let me help you. 3 days ago. Derek's body was fully turned now, and David could see what had happened to him. His torso had elongated, ribs spreading apart, skin stretching between them like canvas over a frame. His fingers had grown into claws, the nails black and sharp. His teeth had pushed forward through his gums, too many of them, too long. I found a hiker, dead, week-old, maybe more. I should have reported it, should have called it in, but I was hungry, so hungry. I ate one of the protein bars from his pack, just one. Didn't think about where his mouth had been. Didn't think about what I was taking into myself. The hunger in David's stomach intensified. He understood now what it meant, why it felt so wrong. It wasn't his hunger. It was something else. Something that lived in the cold and fed on violation and waited for people to cross lines they didn't even know existed. The Wendigo. The word came from somewhere deep in David's memory, from a seminar on indigenous cultural sites, a Blackfeet elder talking about the old stories, the warnings that white rangers dismissed as superstition. Jesus Christ, Derek, you're talking about a Wendigo. Derek laughed, and the sound was wrong. Too many voices laughing at different pitches. Not talking about, becoming. It's been 3 days, David. 3 days of the hunger growing, the cold spreading, my body changing. I tried to fight it, tried to starve it out, but it just made it worse, made me need. He took a step toward David. His movements were fluid now, predatory. All the human awkwardness burned away. You need to run. You need to run right now, because if you stay, I will eat you. Not because I hate you, not because I want to, because I'm so hungry, David, so impossibly hungry. And you smell like meat and warmth and life, and I need it. I need it so badly. David pulled his bear spray from his belt. Useless against what Derek was becoming, but it was something. Fight it, Derek. You're still in there. You can still... No. Derek's yellow eyes were leaking something dark, tears that froze on his gray cheeks. I can't. The hunger is all there is now. It's all I am. The thing I was. The person who had kids and a wife and a life. He's gone. Being eaten from the inside, and when there's nothing left of him, when the transformation is complete, I'll hunt, I'll kill. I'll spread the hunger to everyone I touch. That's what Wendigos do. That's what I am now. He lunged, not at David, but past him, toward the cave entrance. David spun, watching in horror as Derek's transformed body moved with impossible speed, all his mass concentrated into lethal efficiency. He cleared the opening in a single bound and disappeared into the white landscape beyond. David stood frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to call for backup, to evacuate the area, to warn everyone that something was loose in the park that shouldn't exist. But his radio was dead. His satellite phone was back at the truck, and Derek, or what Derek was becoming, was headed downslope, toward lower elevations, toward the seasonal cabins on the lake, toward people, toward David's family, who lived in park housing 20 miles away, toward Sophia, who'd be coming home from school in a few hours, toward Miguel, who liked to play in the woods behind their house, toward Carmen, who took the late shift and walked home alone through the dark. David ran. The valley exit that Derek had used wasn't the way David had come in. It led east toward a different drainage, a series of frozen waterfalls and ice-slicked slopes that would be treacherous even for someone who wasn't being pursued by a monster wearing his colleague's skin. David slipped twice, nearly lost his ice axe once, and scraped his hands raw, catching himself from falls that would have meant broken bones or worse. The hunger was constant now, a presence that had moved from his stomach into his chest, his throat, his head. It whispered in a language he almost understood, showing him images of meat, of blood, of teeth closing on yielding flesh. He tried to force it away, tried to focus on Carmen and the kids, on getting home, on survival, but the hunger was patient. It knew what hypothermia did to judgment. It knew what fear did to resolve. He found Derek's trail again near the frozen waterfall. More blood, but also something else. Pieces of fabric that had been Derek's clothing, but torn now, arranged in patterns that might have been words in a language David didn't recognize. And beyond them, carved into the ice, symbols that hurt to look at directly. Angular, wrong, making David's eyes water and his head throb. The wind picked up, carrying with it sounds that could have been voices, whispering in Ojibwe and Cree, in languages older than the mountains. David didn't speak those languages, but he understood the message anyway. Turn back. This is not your hunt. This is not your death to choose, but it was his family, his life, his responsibility. He kept going. The trail led down through tree line into old-growth forest, massive Douglas firs and alpine larch that had been here before white people discovered this land, before it became a park, before it had any name but the ones given by people who actually understood what lived in these mountains. The light was strange here, filtered through needles and filtered again through something else, some quality of the air that made everything look slightly out of focus. David found the first body near a lightning-struck tree. A mule deer, gutted and partially eaten. Fresh kill, still steaming in the cold. But the way it had been opened was wrong. No predator did this. No bear or wolf or cougar. The rib cage had been torn apart from the inside out, like something had wanted to crawl into the warm cavity and live there. The hunger surged. David's mouth flooded with saliva, He took 3 steps toward the carcass before he caught himself, before he realized what he was doing. He stood there shaking, tasting copper on his tongue, fighting an urge so powerful it felt like gravity. He forced himself to turn away, to keep moving, to remember why he was here. The second body was a mile farther down. Another deer. This one was worse. Derek had been experimenting, trying different things. The organs were arranged outside the body in patterns, in shapes, like he was trying to read augury from entrails the way ancient Romans had, trying to understand what he was becoming through the meat he'd consumed. David's radio crackled to life. Signal was back. The voice was broken, fragmented but audible. Gear 7, your location. Backup is... He keyed the mic with shaking hands. Base, this is Ranger 7. Derek Sullivan is alive but compromised. Possible acute hypothermia with psychotic features. He's heading east-southeast toward Lake McDonald. He's extremely dangerous. You need to evacuate all personnel and residents in his path. You need to do it now. Ranger 7, you're breaking up. Say again? Evacuate Lake McDonald housing. Lock down all facilities. Sullivan is dangerous. He's... The radio died. Not from signal loss. Derek had appeared from behind a tree and crushed it in his fist. He was fully transformed now, 8 feet tall, maybe 9, body elongated and skeletal, covered in frost that grew like fur. His face was still recognizable, still Derek's nose, Derek's cheekbones, but stretched over a skull that had reshaped itself into something predatory. His yellow eyes burned with intelligence and hunger in equal measure. I told you to run. His voice was clearer now, the human components burned away, leaving only the thing underneath. I told you I couldn't be saved. But you followed anyway, because you're good, because you're brave, because you have people waiting for you at home who need you to survive. And now... He moved so fast, David barely registered it. One moment, Derek was 10 feet away. The next, David was on his back in the snow, the Wendigo's weight crushing his chest, claws pressed against his throat. Now I'm going to eat you. Derek's breath was ice crystals and rot. And you're going to become like me. And together we'll hunt. We'll feed. We'll spread the hunger until everyone in this park, everyone in these mountains, everyone who ever made the mistake of thinking they could tame the wilderness, they'll all understand what it means to truly starve. David couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The claws were pressing down, breaking skin, about to tear through to the artery. He thought about Sophia's birthday party tomorrow, about the 3-tier unicorn cake, about Miguel's construction paper decorations, about Carmen's double shift and the way she'd kissed him goodbye this morning, not knowing it was goodbye forever. And then he thought about what Derek had said, about the taboo, about how he'd eaten from a dead man's supplies, about how the hunger had started not from starvation but from violation, from crossing a line, from taking something that wasn't his to take. David stopped fighting. Do it, he said. Kill me. Eat me. If that's what you need, do it. Derek hesitated. The pressure on David's throat eased fractionally. What? You're hungry, I understand. So eat me. Take what you need. I'm offering it freely. No violation, no theft. I'm giving you permission. It doesn't work that way. But there was uncertainty in Derek's voice now, something human struggling to surface through the monster. The hunger doesn't care about permission. It only cares about taking, about violation, about the taboo. Then maybe, David forced out, that's how you fight it, by not taking, by choosing not to violate, by remembering that you had a choice even when you thought you didn't. For a moment, nothing moved. The forest was absolutely silent. Even the wind had stopped. Derek's yellow eyes searched David's face, looking for deception, for tricks, for anything that would justify giving in to the hunger. Then Derek pulled back, stood, took 3 steps backward and collapsed to his knees in the snow. I can't. The voice was Derek's again, fully Derek's, human and breaking. I can't fight it much longer. The hunger is everything. It's all I can think about. But you're right. I still have a choice. Not about being hungry, but about what I do with it. He looked up at David, and his eyes were human again for just a moment. Brown, frightened, aware of what he'd become and what he was losing. You need to kill me. Now. While I'm still myself enough to ask. Before the hunger takes over completely. Please, David. My kids can't know I became this. Carmen can't know. Let them think it was an accident, a fall, hypothermia. Anything but the truth. David struggled to his feet, hand pressed against his bleeding throat. I can't kill you, Derek. There has to be another way. Medical intervention, psychiatric. There's no cure for this. Derek's voice cracked. This isn't disease, it's transformation. It's irreversible. In a few hours, maybe less, I won't be Derek Sullivan anymore. I'll be something that wears his face and hunts his friends, and eventually, inevitably, I'll find my way to his home and his family, and I'll... He choked on the words. I can't let that happen. I won't. He stood, his body shifting back toward its monstrous form, the human facade crumbling. If you won't do it, I'll force you to. I'll make you afraid enough, desperate enough, whatever it takes. Because this is the last good thing I can do. The last choice I can make while I'm still human enough to make it. David understood then. Understood what Derek was asking. What he needed. Not a ranger to ranger. Not colleague to colleague. But one father to another. One man who loved his children to another man who loved his just as much. The mercy that came not from pity, but from understanding exactly what was at stake. David pulled his service weapon, a Glock 22 that he'd carried for 6 years and never fired outside the range. His hands were shaking. Are you sure? No. Derek smiled, and it was his real smile, the one David remembered from that rescue in July, from coffee breaks at the station, from all the ordinary moments of an ordinary life that was ending in the most extraordinary way. But I'm sure about what happens if you don't, and I'm sure my kids deserve better than a monster wearing their father's face. I'll tell them you were a hero. David's voice cracked. I'll tell them you saved people. I'll make sure they know. Thank you. Derek knelt in the snow again, his transformation accelerating, body elongating, frost spreading across his skin like fast-growing mold. Do it now, please, before I change my mind, before there's no mind left to change. David aimed. His training kicked in. Center mass, controlled breathing, squeeze don't pull. But this wasn't a paper target. This was Derek Sullivan, 29 years old, father of 2, good ranger, good man, who'd made one mistake and paid for it with everything. I'm sorry, David whispered. Me too. Derek's eyes were yellow again, but still human in the center, still Derek looking out. Tell my kids. David fired 3 times. Center mass just like training. Derek's body jerked, fell, lay still in the snow. The frost on his skin began to melt, the supernatural cold retreating, leaving behind only a man who died too young, too far from home, in the grip of something no training could prepare you for. David sank to his knees. The gun fell from his hands. He'd just killed a colleague, a friend. The official report would call it self-defense, justified use of force against an armed threat. But David would always know the truth, would always carry this moment, this choice, this necessary evil. The hunger was gone. Whatever had connected him to the Wendigo curse, whatever shadow of it had touched him through proximity to Derek's transformation, it had died with Derek. David's stomach felt normal again. Empty, yes, but normally empty. The kind of empty that a sandwich would fix, not the kind that could never be filled. He used his satellite phone to call it in, gave his coordinates, told them officer involved shooting, ranger down, need immediate evac. They asked questions he couldn't answer. Promised backup was en route. Told him to secure the scene and wait. He waited. Sat in the snow next to Derek's body and waited. The sun moved across the sky, indifferent to tragedy. The cold settled in, natural cold this time, the kind that could be fought with proper clothing and movement. In the distance, he heard the helicopter approaching. They'd ask questions. There would be investigations, paperwork, psychological evaluations. David would tell them most of the truth. would leave out the parts about monsters and transformations and ancient taboos, would frame it as a medical emergency, a psychotic break brought on by hypothermia and isolation. And they'd believe him because the alternative was impossible. But David would know, would carry the knowledge like a weight, would look at his children and understand, really understand, why certain lines existed, why certain rules mattered, why the wilderness, the real wilderness, demanded respect, not just for its beauty, but for its absolute indifference to human life and human rules. He'd put in for a transfer. Take the family back to Phoenix, back to heat and concrete, and places where the hunger didn't live in the cold spaces between trees. Carmen would be relieved. Sophia and Miguel would adjust. Life would go on. But sometimes David knew. He'd wake in the middle of the night remembering yellow eyes and impossible hunger. He'd check the locks on the doors and windows. He'd make sure his kids were safe, warm, fed. He'd remember Derek Sullivan, who'd violated a taboo he didn't know existed and paid the ultimate price. Who'd fought the monster inside him long enough to beg for mercy, for death, for an end that came from love rather than hunger. And David would remember the choice he'd made, the mercy he'd given, the weight of that moment that he'd carry for the rest of his life. The helicopter touched down in a clearing 100 yards away. The investigation team emerged, their faces grim, their movements efficient. David stood, raised his hands to show he was unarmed, waited to be processed through the machinery of official response. Derek Sullivan had died a hero, he'd make sure of that. Had died fighting something terrible. The kids would never know the truth. No one would. That was the last gift David could give him. And in the forests of Glacier National Park, where the old stories still lived in the spaces between trees, the hunger waited. Patient as ice, hungry as winter. Ready for the next person who crossed the wrong line, violated the wrong taboo, took what wasn't theirs to take. The mountains remembered. The cold remembered. The Wendigo remembered. And now, David Ramirez remembered too. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. I'm so hungry I could eat myself. Amanda Castellano looked up from her incident report, pen frozen mid-signature. Sophia Carr stood in the doorway of the ranger station, her silhouette backlit by the November twilight. Something about the way she'd said it, flat, emotionless like reading from a script, made Amanda's scalp prickle. Long patrol? Amanda asked, keeping her voice casual. Sophia didn't answer. She stood perfectly still for another 3 seconds, then walked to her locker without acknowledging the question. Her movements were stiff, mechanical. She'd been gone for 6 days on a solo wilderness survey of the northern backcountry, and she looked like she'd aged a decade. Her cheeks were hollow, eyes sunken deep in bruised sockets. The smell coming off her was wrong, not just unwashed, but something underneath that. Something rancid. Amanda had been a ranger at Glacier National Park for 17 years. She'd seen hypothermia, frostbite, altitude sickness, and every variety of wilderness trauma the Montana Rockies could inflict on human bodies. She knew what suffering looked like. This was different. Sophia, Amanda said carefully. When's the last time you ate? Don't remember. Sophia opened her locker and stared at the contents without moving. Days, maybe. Nothing tastes right anymore. Everything's... She trailed off, her hand hovering over a protein bar. Her fingers were trembling. Everything's not enough. Not enough. Not enough. Sophia's voice cracked on the repetition. She turned, and Amanda saw her eyes properly for the first time. The pupils were dilated so wide there was barely any iris visible, just vast black pools that seemed to swallow light. Amanda, I need to tell you something about what I found up near Kintla Peak. Okay, let me finish this report and... No, now, before I... Sophia swayed, caught herself against the locker. before I forget how to say it. Amanda set down her pen. In 17 years, she'd developed good instincts about when to follow protocol and when to trust her gut. Right now, her gut was screaming that something was very, very wrong. "Sit down," she said, pulling out a chair. "Start from the beginning." Sophia sat, but her posture was wrong. Spine too straight, head cocked at an odd angle, like a predator trying to imitate human casualness. "I was surveying the northwestern quadrant, mile marker 47. You know that area, old-growth forest, mostly pine and spruce. I set up camp at the usual site near Boulder Creek." Amanda nodded. She knew the location. Remote, but not dangerously so. Good visibility, access to water, reasonable hiking distance from the nearest trail. "First night was normal," Sophia continued. Her voice had gone flat again, that same reading from a script quality. "Second night, I heard something moving through the trees. Big. Bigger than a bear and moving wrong, not on 4 legs. 2. Could have been another hiker. At 3 in the morning? In November? 12 miles from the nearest trail?" Sophia's laugh was brittle. "I thought the same thing. Told myself it was nothing. But the third night I saw it. The station's heating system kicked on with a rattle, but Amanda felt cold anyway." "Saw what?" "Tall. So tall its head was above the tree line. Thin like it was starving, but wrong thin, you know. Stretched. Its limbs were too long and bent backwards at the joints. And its face?" Sophia's trembling intensified. "Its face was human. Or used to be. Mostly skull showing through torn skin. But the eyes were alive. Hungry." Amanda had heard plenty of wilderness stories over the years. Hikers imagining things in the dark, shadows becoming monsters, the mind playing tricks under stress. She'd learned to nod sympathetically and write "possible hallucination" in her reports. But the conviction in Sophia's voice made it hard to dismiss. And the physical deterioration, that was real. Whatever Sophia had experienced, it had affected her profoundly. "Did you try to document it? Photographs?" "My camera died. Phone too. All my electronics stopped working after I saw it. But I didn't need proof, Amanda. Because it wasn't just watching me. It was inside me. Inside you. In my head. I could hear it thinking, feel it wanting. It was so hungry, Amanda. Hungry in a way that never ends. Hungry enough to..." Sophia pressed her palms against her temples. "I left. Packed up and hiked out as fast as I could, but it followed. I could feel it behind me the whole way. And the hunger." She stopped abruptly, her jaw clenching. For a moment she just breathed, each exhalation visible in the cold air despite the heating system. Then she stood, walked to the small kitchenette, and opened the refrigerator. Amanda watched as Sophia pulled out a package of raw ground beef, supplies for the staff dinner planned for next week. Sophia tore open the plastic wrapping and shoved a handful of meat into her mouth. "Jesus, Sophia." But Sophia was already swallowing, reaching for more. She ate mechanically, methodically, her face devoid of expression or pleasure. Just consumption. Just filling an emptiness. Amanda crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed Sophia's wrist. "Stop. You're going to make yourself sick." Sophia looked at her hand, then at Amanda's face, and her eyes focused for the first time since she'd entered the station. Recognition flickered across her features, followed immediately by horror. "Oh God," she whispered. The raw meat fell from her fingers. "Oh God, what am I doing?" "You're in shock, hypothermia maybe. We need to get you to a hospital." No hospital." Sophia pulled away, backing toward the door. "It's not hypothermia, it's not shock. Amanda, I brought something back with me, from the mountains. Something that..." She stopped, tilted her head again, listening to something Amanda couldn't hear. Then she smiled, and it was the worst thing Amanda had seen in 17 years of wilderness work. A smile with too many teeth, stretched too wide, accompanied by a soft sound that might have been laughter or crying. "It's so hungry," Sophia said, "and I'm so full of meat." Then she ran. Amanda lunged after her, but Sophia was faster, impossibly fast, clearing the station's front steps in a single bound and disappearing into the darkening forest. By the time Amanda reached the tree line, there was no sign of her except rapidly fading footprints in the November frost. "Shit," Amanda breathed. She grabbed her radio. "Dispatch, this is Castellano at Boulder Station. I have a ranger in distress, possibly experiencing a medical emergency. Sophia Carr just fled into the backcountry on foot. I'm pursuing, but I'll need backup, and possibly SAR." The radio crackled. "Copy that, Castellano. What's her condition?" "How to explain? Eating raw meat, talking about monsters, displaying symptoms that resembled psychosis, but felt like something else entirely. Unknown. Possible hypothermia or neurological event. She's not thinking clearly. I'm going after her now." "Negative, Castellano. Hold position until backup arrives. Don't pursue alone after dark." It was the sensible call, the protocol call. But Amanda had 17 years of experience, and she knew these mountains better than anyone. She knew the terrain, the dangers, the places someone in Sophia's condition might go, and she knew what November nights in Glacier could do to someone without proper gear. "Copy," she lied, and switched off the radio. She grabbed her emergency pack, always kept ready by the door, and her mag light. The temperature was already dropping below freezing, and once the sun set completely, it would plummet to the low 20s. Sophia was wearing only her uniform jacket. She had maybe 2 hours before hypothermia became life-threatening. Amanda had tracked plenty of lost hikers over the years, reading signs, following disturbances, thinking like someone who's panicked and disoriented. But Sophia's tracks were different. They moved with purpose, following a direct line northwest, back toward Kintla Peak, back toward whatever she'd seen. The forest closed around Amanda like a fist. The November trees were skeletal, their bare branches forming intricate patterns against the darkening sky. Her breath plumed in the cold air and frost crunched under her boots. 17 years and these woods still held capacity for surprise, for beauty and danger in equal measure. But tonight they felt different. Watching. She'd hiked maybe 2 miles when she noticed the cold. Not the normal November cold. This was deeper, more penetrating. The kind of cold that came from inside and radiated outward. Her extremities went numb despite her insulated gloves, and her face felt like someone was pressing ice directly against her skin. The tracks continued, unwavering. Amanda's radio crackled with static. Then Morrison's voice broke through. "Castellano, respond. What's your 20? She pulled out the radio, but it died in her hand. Battery fully charged 2 hours ago, now completely dead. She tried her cell phone. Same thing. Her GPS watch displayed gibberish, coordinates that placed her simultaneously in Montana, Alaska, and somewhere in the Arctic Ocean. Electronics dying. Just like Sophia said. Amanda had never been prone to superstition. She dealt in facts, topography, weather patterns, animal behavior, human physiology. The mountains were dangerous, but they operated according to comprehensible rules. Cause and effect. Action and consequence. But standing in the darkening forest with dead electronics and tracks that led toward something that had driven a competent ranger to eat raw meat and flee into the wilderness, Amanda felt her certainty waver. She kept walking. The tracks led to a clearing she didn't recognize, which was strange because she knew this territory. The clearing wasn't on any of her maps, a rough circle maybe 50 feet across, ringed by white pines that leaned inward at unnatural angles. The ground was bare despite the surrounding leaf litter, just exposed granite covered with a thin layer of frost. And symbols. Carved into the stone, spiraling from the center of the clearing outward. Pictographs and markings that Amanda recognized as Native American in origin. Blackfeet, probably, or one of the other tribes who'd inhabited this region before being displaced. She'd seen similar markings at documented archaeological sites, but never anything this extensive, or this disturbing. The symbols depicted figures that were almost human. Tall, skeletal, with elongated limbs and gaping mouths. Some were shown consuming others, the imagery explicit and brutal. And at the center of the spiral, a word in what might have been Cree or Ojibwe, repeated dozens of times. Weedico Amanda pulled out her field notebook and copied the word, her fingers clumsy with cold. She'd studied Indigenous history as part of her ranger training, but this term wasn't familiar, some local legend probably. A cautionary tale to keep people away from dangerous areas. Sophia stood at the center of the clearing. Amanda's heart lurched. She'd been so focused on the symbols she hadn't registered the figure crouched motionless among them. Sophia was on her hands and knees, head down, perfectly still. "Sophia?" Amanda called softly. "It's okay. I'm here to bring you back." No response. Amanda approached slowly, keeping her movements calm and non-threatening. "You're experiencing something. I don't know what, hypothermia, altitude sickness, something else. But we can get you help. Whatever you saw up at Kintla Peak, whatever you think is happening, we can work through it." Sophia raised her head. Her face had changed. The hollowness was more pronounced, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut. But it was her expression that stopped Amanda cold, empty, and ravenous simultaneously. Looking at Amanda the way a wolf looks at wounded prey. "I told you I brought something back," Sophia said. Her voice was layered now, multiple tones overlapping. "It followed me, and then it found a way in." "A way into what?" "Me." Sophia stood, her movements fluid and wrong. "It was so easy, Amanda. I was hungry and it was hungry and we were the same hunger. Do you understand? We wanted. We want. And there's so much meat in the world." Amanda's hand moved to her service weapon, a Glock 22 she'd carried for 17 years and never once fired outside of training. "Sophia, I need you to come back to the station with me. Right now." "I can't." Sophia took a step forward. "It won't let me. It's been alone so long, Amanda. Centuries. Trapped here after the old ones bound it. Starving. But I let it in, and now it remembers what it was. What it needs." The cold intensified, so sudden and severe that Amanda gasped. Her breath crystallized instantly, her exposed skin burning. Around them, the frost spread across the clearing like living crystal, patterns forming and reforming in designs that hurt to look at directly. "The old stories call it Weedico," Sophia continued, circling now, stalking. "Wendigo in some dialects. Spirit of hunger and winter. It possesses people who violate the great taboo, those who eat their own kind. But it's so much more than that. It's the hunger beneath all hungers, the want that never ends." Amanda's training had covered a lot of scenarios. Armed intruders, animal attacks, natural disasters. But not this. Not a colleague talking about possession while exhibiting symptoms that medical science couldn't explain, and indigenous legends might. "Whatever you think is happening, I don't think I know." Sophia's circling brought her closer. "I can feel it inside me. Growing. Changing me. Soon there won't be a me anymore. Just it. Just hunger. And Amanda..." Her voice cracked, showing a glimpse of the person underneath. "I can't stop it, I tried. But it's so strong, and I'm so tired, and the hunger never stops." For a moment, just a moment, Amanda saw her colleague, saw the fear and anguish beneath the possession, saw Sophia fighting against something that was devouring her from the inside. Then the moment passed, and Sophia's face went blank again. "Run," she whispered. "Please run. While I can still tell you to." Amanda ran. She crashed through the forest, branches whipping her face, roots trying to trip her. Behind her, something moved through the trees, fast and getting faster. Not footsteps. Something else. The crack of breaking branches, the hiss of disturbed air, and beneath it all a sound like wind through dead leaves. Like breathing, if breathing could be hungry. Her maglite beam bounced wildly, illuminating fragments. Twisted bark, frost spreading in impossible patterns. Shadows that moved independently of her light. The forest had transformed into something alien, every familiar landmark rendered strange and threatening. She burst onto a hiking trail, finally something she recognized. The Kintla Lake Trail, which meant the ranger station was 4 miles east. She had her emergency pack, her weapon, her training. She could make it. The breathing sound grew closer. Amanda chanced to look over her shoulder and immediately wished she hadn't. The thing following her was no longer Sophia, or was Sophia transformed beyond recognition? It ran on all fours despite having a human shape, its limbs bent at wrong angles to accommodate the movement. Its face was elongated, jaw unhinged, eyes reflecting her flashlight beam like an animal's. But it still wore Sophia's uniform jacket. Amanda put on speed, her lungs burning in the frigid air. 4 miles. She'd run 4 miles plenty of times. She could do this. The trail ahead split, and Amanda took the left fork without thinking. Muscle memory from 17 years of hiking these paths. But the trail wasn't right. It twisted back on itself, leading not toward the station, but deeper into the wilderness. She tried to retrace her steps, but the forest had rearranged itself somehow. Every path led wrong. She was lost in terrain she knew better than her own apartment. The Sophia thing emerged from the trees ahead, cutting off her escape. It stood upright now, head tilted, studying her with what might have been curiosity. Its fingers had elongated into claws, tearing through the gloves it still wore. Frost crystallized on its skin, spreading in fractal patterns. "You can't run from hunger," it said in Sophia's voice, layered with that deeper tone. "Everyone has it inside them. The want, the need. I can smell it on you, Amanda. Your hunger." "I'm not hungry." "Liar." The thing smiled. "You hunger for control, for certainty. You've spent 17 years mastering these mountains, learning their secrets, making them knowable. But there are things that can't be known, hungers that can't be satisfied, and I can teach you." It lunged. Amanda fired 3 times, center mass, the way she'd been trained. The shots were deafening in the forest quiet, and at this range, she didn't miss. She saw the impacts, saw the Sophia thing stagger, but it didn't fall. It looked down at the wounds, then back at Amanda, and laughed with Sophia's voice. "This body's already dying," it said. "Bullets just make it faster. And when it's finally used up, I'll just find another. Maybe yours." It came again, impossibly fast. Amanda threw herself sideways, rolled, came up running. Her radio crackled suddenly, Morrison's voice cutting through the static. "Yano, respond. Multiple rangers en route to your last known..." The signal died, but it gave her hope. Backup was coming. She just had to survive until they arrived. The forest opened into another clearing, this one natural, a granite outcropping that offered a panoramic view of the valley below. The main ranger station was visible in the distance, lights warm and inviting, less than 2 miles away as the crow flies. Impossible to reach with the Sophia thing between her and safety. Amanda's back was literally against the wall, a sheer drop behind her, the possessed thing in front. Her weapon was useless. Her radio dead. She was out of options. Except one. "Tell me how to stop it," Amanda called. "The real Sophia is still in there. I saw her. She told me to run because she was fighting it, so fight harder. Tell me how to kill it." The thing tilted its head, considering. Then Sophia's voice emerged, clearer than before. "You can't kill it. It's not alive, but you can trap it. The old ones did it before. The symbols in the clearing, they're a binding circle. If you can get it back there, complete the spiral, you can lock it away again." "How do I complete the spiral?" "Blood and intent. The spiral needs a sacrifice to close, someone willing to anchor the binding." Sophia's face twisted with effort. "It's fighting me. I can't hold it much longer. Amanda, listen. It wants to jump to you. That's what it's been doing. Sophia is just its current host. If you let it in even for a moment, it'll take root. Then I won't let it in. Everyone lets it in eventually. Everyone has hunger. Everyone wants. And the Wendigo is want made manifest." The Sophia thing took a step forward. "I can feel your hunger even now, Amanda. Your need for control, for understanding, for certainty in an uncertain world. Let me in. and I can show you what's beneath all that. The truth of what humans really are. And what's that? Hungry. It lunged again, but this time Amanda was ready. She'd palmed a flare from her emergency pack and she fired it point blank into the thing's chest. The magnesium ignited, burning at 3,000 degrees, and the Sophia thing shrieked, a sound that had nothing human in it. It stumbled backward, clawing at the burning flare embedded in its torso. The smell was horrific, burning meat and something worse, something that made Amanda's gorge rise. But it bought her time. She ran, not away but toward the first clearing. Back to the symbols, back to the spiral that might be her only chance. The forest fought her every step. Roots grabbed her ankles, branches whipped her face, the cold intensified until her lungs burned with each breath. But Amanda had 17 years of experience and she knew how to push through pain. The clearing appeared, its spiral of symbols glowing faintly in the darkness. Or maybe she was imagining that. Maybe the hypothermia was finally setting in, making her see things. The Sophia thing emerged from the trees, the flare still burning in its chest. It moved slower now, damaged, but still coming, still hungry. Amanda stood at the center of the spiral and pulled out her Benchmade knife. Blood and intent, Sophia had said. Someone willing to anchor the binding. "I'm sorry," she said to the thing that used to be her colleague. "I should have been faster. Should have recognized the signs earlier. Should have fed me," the Wendigo said, using Sophia's mouth. "Should have let me in when I asked nicely. But humans always resist, always deny what they are. It makes the hunger sweeter when they finally break." It stepped into the clearing, crossing the outer ring of symbols. Frost spread from its feet, coating the carved stone. Amanda cut her palm, a quick, deep slash, and let blood drip onto the central symbol. "By whatever power bound you before," she said, improvising, "I bind you again. This circle is closed. This hunger ends here." The Wendigo laughed. "You think it's that easy? A little blood and some words?" The old ones spent months preparing the original binding. They starved themselves to understand hunger. They committed terrible acts to know the Wendigo's nature. And even then, they could only trap it temporarily. "What makes you think—" It stopped. The symbols were glowing now. Definitely glowing, not Amanda's imagination. Pale blue light spreading from the center outward, following the spiral pattern. The Wendigo looked down and realized its mistake. It had entered the circle willingly, drawn by its hunger for Amanda. "No," it said. "No, this isn't—" The light intensified, becoming painful to look at directly. The Sophia thing tried to flee, but invisible chains held it in place. It shrieked again, thrashing against the binding, and Amanda saw something emerge from Sophia's body. A shadow that was somehow more solid than shadow should be. Tall and skeletal, just like Sophia had described. A Wendigo in its true form. The binding circle pulsed and the shadow was drawn back into the symbols, compressed, contained. Sophia collapsed. Amanda rushed forward, catching her before she hit the stone. Sophia was breathing, barely, her body racked with violent shivers. The wounds from Amanda's bullets were visible now, no longer suppressed by the Wendigo's presence. Bad wounds. Fatal, maybe. "Did it work?" Sophia whispered. "I don't know. I'm so cold, Amanda, and so hungry. But it's my hunger now. Just mine. Human hunger." She smiled weakly. "That's something, right?" "That's something," Amanda agreed. Sophia's eyes started to close. "The spiral isn't complete. The binding won't hold forever. Eventually it'll break free and find another host. Unless what? Unless someone stays. Someone to anchor it. To keep the spiral closed through will and presence." Sophia's hand gripped Amanda's arm with surprising strength. "I can do that. I invited it in. My responsibility to keep it out. You're hurt. You need medical attention. I'm dying, Amanda, we both know that. But I can do this one thing. I can make sure it doesn't hurt anyone else." Her grip loosened. "Tell my sister I'm sorry. Tell her I loved her." "Sophia." But Sophia was already gone, her last breath misting in the cold air. And as she died, the symbols flared brightly, then settled into a steady glow, the spiral complete, the binding sealed. Amanda knelt there for a long time, holding her colleague's body, feeling the cold seep into her bones. She'd been a ranger for 17 years. She'd seen death before, had carried bodies out of the wilderness, had notified next of kin, had written reports that reduced tragedy to bureaucratic language. But this was different. She'd witnessed something that shouldn't exist, had seen her colleague possessed by a hunger so vast it transcended human understanding, had bound a spirit from indigenous legend using blood and symbols and sheer desperate will. And now she had to figure out how to explain it. The backup Morrison had promised arrived 40 minutes later, 3 rangers with searchlights and medical equipment. They found Amanda sitting beside Sophia's body, both of them covered in frost. "What happened?" Morrison asked, kneeling beside them. Amanda looked at him, this man she'd worked alongside for 7 years. Looked at the other rangers, people she trusted with her life. And she tried to find words for what she'd experienced. "Hypothermia," she said finally. "Sophia got disoriented during her patrol. Neurological event, maybe. She fled the station and I pursued. By the time I caught up, she was already gone." Morrison's eyes were sharp. "And the gunshot wounds?" "She attacked me. I didn't have a choice." It was barely a lie. Close enough to truth that she could almost believe it herself. They carried Sophia's body back to the station. Paramedics examined Amanda and diagnosed severe hypothermia, minor frostbite, and shock. She was transported to a hospital in Kalispell, kept for observation, and released 3 days later. The official investigation concluded that Sophia Carr had suffered a sudden psychological break during an extended solo patrol. Contributing factors included isolation, extreme cold, and possible contamination of her water supply leading to neurological symptoms. Ranger Amanda Castellano had pursued against protocol, but likely saved herself from freezing to death by staying mobile. The discharge of her weapon was deemed justified. Case closed. But Amanda knew better. She researched the term she'd copied from the clearing, Wetiko, founded in anthropological texts about Algonquian and Cree mythology. The Wendigo, a spirit of insatiable hunger that possessed humans who turned to cannibalism. The legends described it exactly as Sophia had, tall, skeletal, eternally starving. And according to the stories, it could never be permanently destroyed, only bound, only contained, and only at great cost. The Blackfeet elders she carefully reached out to, unofficially without identifying herself, confirmed that certain places in Glacier were considered spiritually dangerous. Places where the barrier between worlds was thin, places where Wendigos had once walked, places where they could walk again if the bindings failed. Amanda returned to work a month later. She was offered a transfer, a promotion to a station with more staff and less isolation. She declined. Someone needed to watch the clearing. Someone needed to make sure the symbols stayed intact. Someone needed to remember what Sophia had sacrificed. She hiked to the clearing once a month. The symbols were always there, glowing faintly in the darkness. Sometimes she thought she heard breathing sounds from the center of the spiral. Sometimes she felt the hunger pressing against the binding, testing for weaknesses. But it held. For now. Amanda updated her will to include instructions for her replacement, coded carefully, so they'd seem like superstitious folklore unless you knew what to look for. She marked the clearing on private maps. She studied indigenous binding rituals and gathered the materials that might be needed if the spiral ever failed. Because she understood now what Sophia had learned too late. Some hungers never die. They just wait, patient and eternal. The mountains were beautiful and deadly, and beneath their beauty lurked things that predated human understanding. Things that saw humans not as individuals, but as vessels, as meat. And Amanda Castellano, veteran of 17 years, had learned the fundamental truth that would haunt her remaining days. Certainty was an illusion. Control was a fantasy. and the wilderness held mysteries that no amount of experience could prepare you for. She still loved the mountains, still hiked their trails and knew their secrets, but she loved them differently now, with the respect due to something vast and incomprehensible, something that tolerated human presence but could never be truly mastered. On November nights, when the temperature dropped below freezing and frost coated the ground, Amanda sometimes stood at the edge of the forest and listened, for breathing sounds, for the crack of branches, for whispers in languages she didn't speak. And sometimes, just sometimes, she felt the hunger inside herself, the want that all humans carried, the need that could never be fully satisfied. On those nights, she thought of Sophia Carr and the choice she'd made, to anchor the binding, to hold the hunger at bay through will alone, to sacrifice herself so others could remain ignorant of what lurked in the dark places of the world. And Amanda wondered how long the binding would hold, wondered what would happen when it finally failed, wondered who would be unlucky enough to let the Wendigo in next time, because there would be a next time. There was always a next time. The hunger was patient, the hunger was eternal, and the hunger was always, always waiting. 3 years later, Amanda found fresh symbols carved around the clearing. Not the original Blackfeet markings. These were cruder, more recent. Someone else had discovered the binding. Someone else had tried to reinforce it, or maybe weaken it. She never found out who, but she increased her patrols, watched the clearing more carefully, and on the anniversary of Sophia's death, she returned to the spiral's center and added her own blood to the binding. Just in case. Because in 17 years, now 20, Amanda Castellano had learned that the wilderness kept its secrets jealously, and some secrets were worth dying to protect. The mountains endured, the hunger endured, and Amanda endured, watching and waiting, hoping the binding would hold. Hoping, but never certain of anything anymore. Except that the cold November nights always returned, and with them, the breathing sounds in the darkness. Always hungry, always waiting, always there. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.